Sometimes history does not begin with a loud explosion or a bright flash in the sky. Sometimes it begins with a soft hum, a quiet glow on a screen, and a young operator leaning forward, trying to understand what he sees. In the early hours before dawn, in a small American radar station near the Pacific coast, a thin green line slowly moved across the circular glass. It did this every few seconds, sweeping calmly, like a lighthouse turning over an empty sea. But on this night, the line did not pass over emptiness. It touched something. A shape. A signal. A movement. And miles away, over dark waters, Japanese planes moved forward with the confidence of a force that believed no one knew they were coming. They trusted the night, the clouds, the silence. They believed their speed and discipline would hide them. For months, they had trained to disappear into the sky, to strike before anyone could react. Every plan, every briefing, every whispered strategy inside their war rooms was built on one idea: America would not see them coming. But deep inside the American system, a new technology had awakened. It was simple, almost mysterious, like magic hidden inside wires and metal. It was radar, a machine that could read what the human eye could not see, detect what even the night tried to hide. Japanese commanders believed this machine was weak, unfinished, not worth their attention. They never imagined that their strongest weapon, surprise, could be taken away by a quiet radio wave crossing the sky. Perhaps this was where their fate began to change. Not on a battlefield. Not on a ship. Not with guns or planes. But with an invisible signal traveling through the air. When the operator saw the strange signal that night, he blinked, unsure. The green shape rose, fell, and rose again. At first, he thought it was an error, a bird, maybe a group of clouds. Radar was still new. Many did not trust it. But something about the movement felt different. It was steady, fast, purposeful. And it was coming from far across the ocean. He leaned closer. He called another operator. Together they watched the silent approach of something they could not name. In that moment, the quiet inside the room felt heavy, as if history itself was waiting for someone to speak. A simple question whispered through the room: "What is that?" Far away, Japanese pilots flew their formations, eyes focused, hearts steady. They had trained for this journey for months. Every detail of the mission had been practiced again and again until it felt like instinct. They believed the sky was blind. They believed the enemy slept. They believed their movement through the night was invisible. But the truth was already changing. The Americans did not fully understand what they were seeing. But they saw something. And sometimes seeing, even without understanding, is enough to shift the course of events. Imagine the Pacific at that time. Vast, deep, dark. A living ocean holding secrets in every direction. Islands scattered like stepping stones. Ships drifting like shadows. Clouds hanging low, carrying the taste of salt across the wind. This was the world both nations were trying to control. A world too large to watch with human eyes alone. Radar became the eyes that humans could not be. But this new eye was still fragile. It was just entering the war. Many officers doubted it. Some even laughed at it. And this disbelief, both in Japan and in certain American branches, became one of the quiet tragedies of history. Because sometimes technology does not arrive loudly. It arrives almost shyly, waiting to be understood. On this night it spoke, softly, but clearly enough. As the signal moved across the radar screen again, the American operators followed it with growing tension. The line swept left then right. The blip stayed, moved, grew. Something was out there. Something large. Something that did not belong. The operator made a decision. He reported it. And like a falling stone causing ripples in a pond, the warning began to move upward through the system. Slowly, unsure, and mixed with doubt. Some listened. Some ignored it. Some waited for confirmation. But the message existed. It had started its journey. And the Japanese force, still confident in their silence, flew closer. The sky above them was cold. The engines buzzed in perfect harmony. The pilots watched stars guide their direction. None of them imagined that far across the ocean, a machine they dismissed was already drawing a faint map of their path. There is a strange beauty in moments like this, when truth begins to take shape before anyone fully realizes it. When small details, small warnings, small discoveries start to build toward something much greater. Perhaps history often works like this, not with sudden shocks, but with quiet signals that only later reveal their meaning. The Pacific War was surrounded by fear, ambition, pride, and misunderstanding. Every nation involved tried to predict the other's moves. Every leader tried to think 10 steps ahead. But no one, not even Japan, expected that the future of warfare would depend on something invisible, something silent, something Japan never believed the Americans could use so well. Radar was still young. But it was awake. And on this night, it watched every move the Japanese force made. As we move deeper into this story, picture the world as it was in those early years. The tension between nations. The race for resources. The fear of losing control over the Pacific. Japan, feeling trapped by economic pressure, searching for expansion. America, uncertain but preparing for the worst. Both nations looking at each other through the fog of suspicion, pride, and misjudgment. This is more than a story about machines. It is a story about assumptions. About confidence that turned into blindness. About technology that arrived before anyone understood how powerful it could become. And at the heart of it all lies a simple truth. Japan never expected American radar to read their every move. But it did. Quietly. Patiently. Before anyone realized what it meant. This is where our journey begins. A night of silence. A signal on a screen. A path that would lead to one of the most surprising and important moments in military history. And now, let us step deeper into that world. Let us understand the minds of nations, the terrain of the Pacific, the birth of radar, and the human stories behind both courage and miscalculation. Perhaps as we move forward, we will see how even the quietest signals can change the fate of empires. The Pacific Ocean in the years leading up to the Great Conflict was more than water and wind. It was a vast world of its own, stretching across thousands of miles, touching nations with completely different dreams and fears. To the west lay Japan, rising with ambition, hungry for resources, driven by the belief that the future belonged to those who seized it. To the east stood the United States, a young but powerful nation watching the growing tension with caution, unsure when the storm would arrive, but sensing that it would. The ocean between them was silent, yet full of energy. Ships crossed it like wandering giants. Storm clouds formed over it with slow, heavy breath. Beneath its surface, currents moved like unseen rivers, shaping weather, shaping journeys, shaping fate. Anyone who stepped onto this ocean understood one truth. Here, the world felt larger than human life, and the smallest mistake could mean disaster. But in this huge space, humans still tried to control everything. Each island chain became a strategic treasure. Each stretch of water became a potential battleground. Japan saw the Pacific as a path to power, a doorway to expand its empire. America saw it as a shield, a line of defense protecting the mainland. Both sides looked at the same ocean, yet saw entirely different futures. To understand why Japan believed they could move unseen, we must enter their world before the conflict truly began. Japan was a proud nation shaped by discipline, tradition, and a strong sense of destiny. Its military leaders believed deeply in the power of surprise. In their view, a successful attack came not from the size of the force, but from how invisible it remained until the very last moment. The sea was their ally. The night was their armor. Clouds were their silent partners. Japanese commanders trained their pilots to fly with precision, like shadows moving through the air. Every journey was practiced until it felt like instinct. Every mistake was ironed out. Every detail was memorized. They trusted speed. They trusted secrecy. And most importantly, they trusted that the enemy, the Americans, had no way to watch them from afar. At this time, Japan believed radar was still too weak, too early, too unreliable to matter. They studied American technology reports, but concluded that these machines were no threat. To them, radar was just a scientific toy, something that might work in theory but not in a real battlefield. This was not arrogance alone. It was also misunderstanding. Radar was not well known. It was not famous. It did not look dangerous. It did not roar like an engine or shine like a spotlight. It simply sent invisible waves into the sky and waited for them to return. To many nations including Japan, radar sounded too strange to be trusted, too experimental to rely on. But America was slowly learning to trust it. On the other side of the Pacific, in small stations filled with humming machines and glowing screens, American engineers and military officers were quietly shaping the future. These early radar rooms were simple and often uncomfortable. The equipment was heavy, warm, and noisy. Cables ran along the floors. Screens flickered. Operators had to sit for long hours, staring at moving lines that often showed nothing but silence. Yet something important was happening in these rooms. Every day, little by little, the Americans were getting better at reading the invisible world. They were learning how signals behaved in storms, how birds looked on screens, how distant planes created small but clear reflections. They were training their eyes to see what had never been seen before. Imagine one of these early stations. The air smells of metal and dust. Fans turn slowly overhead. The radar screen glows soft green in the dim room. Outside, the world is quiet, perhaps with the sound of waves hitting the shore. Inside, a young operator sits with headphones pressed against his ears, listening to faint pops and echoes. Most of it means nothing. But sometimes, something meaningful appears. A tiny blip on the screen that could represent anything from a flock of geese to an approaching aircraft. To these operators, the world had become a puzzle made of shadows. They had to guess which shadow was real, which one mattered, which one could signal danger. It required patience. It required imagination. It required the ability to believe in a machine that many older officers did not yet respect. Over time, American confidence in radar grew. Reports were shared. Experiments were improved. Scientists and soldiers began working together, which was unusual for the era. And quietly, radar became more reliable. Japan had no idea how quickly this progress was happening. While Japanese leaders planned attacks believing they were invisible, American radar slowly learned how to read the sky like a story. It could see movements long before a human eye could. It could sense danger approaching hour after hour, even through fog or darkness. It turned the night from a hiding place into a map. But there was another important part of this story, the landscape itself. The Pacific Islands were scattered across the ocean like stepping stones between continents. Many were small, isolated, and surrounded by reefs. Others were larger, covered in thick jungles that smelled of damp earth and leaves. Their beaches glowed under moonlight. Their mountains stood dark and silent against the sky. For Japanese forces, these islands were targets and paths. For Americans, they were watchpoints, places where radar stations could be built to look outward, across the sea. Each station expanded the reach of radar. Each island increased America's ability to see. Before radar, distance protected Japan. Their fleets could move in the open ocean without being detected. Their planes could fly across long stretches of water without any warning reaching the enemy. But now the ocean was slowly losing its secrecy. There was tension in every direction. Japan, feeling squeezed by economic pressure, believed that securing resources across Asia and the Pacific was the only path to survival. The United States believed that Japan's expansion threatened world balance. Both nations feared the other's intentions. Both nations prepared for war long before the first shots were fired. And in the middle of all this, radar grew more powerful. Sometimes progress is quiet. Sometimes a discovery sits in the background, unnoticed, until the exact moment it becomes essential. Radar was like that, a silent observer waiting for the right moment to prove itself. And that moment would soon arrive. Imagine a map of the Pacific at this time. Lines of Japanese movement. Lines of American patrol routes. Lines of radio signals bouncing across the sky. But only one side understood the invisible lines. The radar waves traveling out, touching the unknown, returning with information. Japan believed their moves were hidden. America was learning to see them. Still, most American officials did not yet realize how important radar would become. They saw it as helpful but not game-changing. They believed in human intelligence, scouting reports, and traditional observation. Radar was just another tool, useful but not trusted enough to replace old methods. This doubt almost cost them everything. Japan's early operations in the Pacific were bold, coordinated, and fast. Their forces moved with confidence, using surprise as their greatest weapon. They approached targets from unexpected angles. They used silence and speed to create confusion. Many of their early victories came from this ability to move unnoticed, and they believed this strategy would work again. But as their fleets moved across the ocean, the Americans were no longer blind. Miles away, radar operators watched the screens. They saw shapes emerging on the horizon of the invisible. They tracked lines that represented aircraft flying in formation. They saw signals rising and falling like waves. They recorded movements. They called superiors. They sent messages. And although some warnings were ignored, the knowledge was growing. Something large was coming. Something purposeful. Something that should not have been there. The Japanese believed the night covered them like a blanket. But radar pierced the night like a needle. This change, this quiet technological awakening, began to shape the war long before the two nations fully understood what was happening. And as we move deeper into the story, the emotional weight becomes clear. This was not just a battle of ships and planes. It was a battle of perception. A battle between what one side believed was true and what the other side had learned to see. Japan trusted invisibility. America trusted a new kind of vision. These two beliefs were now on a collision course. As the world moved closer to conflict, technology and tradition stood face to face. And in the middle of this silent struggle, radar waited patiently for the moment when its signal would reveal a truth that Japan never expected. Their every move was already being watched. This is the world in which our story continues. A world full of ambition, secrecy, misjudgment, and discovery. A world where the smallest signal could change the direction of history. History is often remembered through battles, leaders, and dramatic speeches, but behind every major event, there are small discoveries that quietly shape the future. Radar was one of those discoveries. It did not roar like a fighter plane or shine like a warship's spotlight. It arrived softly, through experiments, mistakes, arguments, and long nights spent by scientists whose names the world barely remembers. Yet their work would soon influence decisions made thousands of miles away, in rooms filled with military commanders who didn't even fully understand the machines they were depending on. To see how this happened, we must go back to the early 1930s, when the idea of radar was still new and untested. Different nations had pieces of the technology, but very few understood how powerful it could become. In America, radar development was guided by a mixture of curiosity and fear. Engineers worried about surprise attacks, especially from the air. Airplanes were getting faster. Bombs were becoming stronger. The world was becoming more dangerous. Scientists at the Naval Research Laboratory, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and several Army research centers began asking a simple but important question. Is it possible to detect an aircraft before the human eye can see it? At first, radar experiments were rough and uncertain. Machines overheated. Signals were messy. Waves bounced in strange ways. Operators struggled to understand what the blips meant. Every breakthrough seemed to come with two new problems. But slowly, patterns began to form. The scientists discovered that radio waves could reflect off metal objects, including airplanes. They built antennas and transmitters. They created screens that translated invisible reflections into glowing shapes. They learned to read small signals hiding inside larger noises. It was not perfect, but it worked. Word of these successes spread quietly through American military channels. Some officers were excited. Others were skeptical. Many believed radar was interesting but not reliable enough to use in real operations. It was still too new, too strange, too complex. But a small group of leaders understood something important. Technology does not have to be perfect to be powerful. Meanwhile, Japan was watching America, but not closely enough. Japanese intelligence officers collected information about American research, but they underestimated the progress. They thought radar required too much power, too much space, too much expertise to be useful in real combat. They also believed that their own tactics, flying low, flying fast, flying in tight formation, would avoid detection. In other words, Japan believed invisibility was still possible. But invisibility was slowly dying. By 1940, radar stations were being built across the American coastline, from Alaska to Hawaii to the Philippines. These stations were small, but each one expanded America's vision. They had tall metal towers, rotating antennas, and large screens that lit up the inside of dark rooms. Operators trained for hours every day, learning how to tell the difference between clouds, birds, and real aircraft. The work was slow, tiring, and sometimes boring, but it was essential. Across the Pacific, Japan continued preparing for war. Their military leaders studied maps, ran simulations, and practiced coordinated attacks. They believed that if they could strike fast and without warning, they could weaken America before it had time to respond. Their entire strategy depended on secrecy. And secrecy depended on the enemy being blind. But America was no longer blind. Let us look at one of the key historical moments that shows this shift. On an island called Oahu in Hawaii, a newly installed radar station began operating in late 1941. It was one of the most advanced systems America had at the time. The operators were young and still learning, but they were dedicated. On December itself, early in the morning, two soldiers watching the radar saw something unusual: a huge formation of aircraft approaching from far across the ocean. They were shocked. They had never seen such a strong signal before. What they saw was Japanese planes moving closer. And here is the tragedy: their warning was not taken seriously. The officer in charge believed it was a group of American bombers arriving for training. He ignored the report. He dismissed the call. The radar had done its job, but the human system behind it had failed. This moment shows a deeper truth about technology. It can reveal the future, but only if people are willing to believe it. Still, the event left an important lesson. As time went on, more military leaders began to trust radar. They recognized that it could save lives, predict attacks, and change strategies. America started investing even more in radar research, building better machines and training more operators. Japan, however, did not make the same shift. As the war expanded across the Pacific, Japanese forces relied heavily on traditional scouting methods: visual observation, radio intercepts, and reports from patrol boats. Their technology was advanced in other areas like aircraft engineering, navigation, and torpedo design, but they did not prioritize radar. They developed some systems, but too slowly and not with the same urgency as America. This difference in technological focus created a hidden gap between the two nations, a gap that Japan did not fully see. Let us examine how radar changed American operations. Before radar, defending the Pacific meant sending planes into the sky and hoping they found the enemy. But with radar, the Americans could wait. They could see where enemy aircraft were coming from. They could predict flight paths. They could organize defenses more effectively. Radar turned guesswork into strategy. It also changed life on American ships. Warships began carrying radar units that could detect aircraft and other ships in the distance. Suddenly, the ocean did not feel as large or as empty. A destroyer in the middle of black water could see objects miles away without needing a searchlight. Crew members no longer depended solely on lookouts standing in the wind, scanning the horizon with binoculars. Radar brought calmness to fear. It brought possibility to chaos. It brought knowledge where before there had been none. Meanwhile, Japanese ships and planes continued operating under the belief that darkness was still a shield. They flew at night, expecting silence to protect them. They sailed through storms, believing weather would hide them. Their commanders thought speed and surprise were their strongest allies. They did not realize that the Americans were slowly piecing together a full picture of their movements. One of the most important advancements in American radar came with the creation of long-range search radar. This new system had increased sensitivity, allowing it to detect aircraft much farther away. It could also filter out noise more effectively, meaning operators could trust what they saw with greater confidence. With this new capability, American forces could monitor large areas of the Pacific. They could track Japanese planes before they were close enough to cause harm. They could position their own aircraft to intercept attacks early. Radar began shaping battles before the first shots were fired. Let us imagine one of those early radar rooms during a tense moment. The air is thick with heat from the machines. The room is dim, lit only by the soft glow of screens. The operator sits with his hands resting near the controls, eyes focused. The circular sweep line moves again and again, each rotation telling a story. Then suddenly a blip appears. Not just one. Many. They move in formation. The operator feels fear rise in his chest. He calls his superior. Other operators gather around. The room fills with quiet tension. Slowly they track the movement. The position updates every few seconds. They speak in calm voices, but their eyes show the truth. Something is happening. Something large. These moments happened again and again across the war. Radar operators became some of the most important unseen soldiers in the conflict. They guided pilots. They warned ships. They watched the sky when everyone else slept. Japan never expected this. In their planning rooms, Japanese commanders believed that information flowed only through human eyes and ears. They assumed if no one physically saw or heard them, they were safe. But the Americans had built a new kind of vision, one that Japan did not fully understand. By mid-war, American radar was not just useful, it was essential. It played a role in nearly every major battle. It helped protect convoys crossing the Pacific. It warned bases of incoming attacks. It guided night fighter aircraft that hunted enemy planes in the dark. It even helped submarines navigate more safely. The war had become a battle of visibility. Japan fought with the belief that they were hidden. America fought with the knowledge that nothing truly was. This difference shaped outcomes in countless ways. Japanese fleets launched operations confident in their secrecy, only to find American defenses waiting. Pilots flew missions believing they were unseen, only to be intercepted earlier than expected. Commanders planned strategies based on old ideas, not realizing that technology had rewritten the rules. Radar did not win battles alone, but it changed the way battles were fought. And it changed them quietly. While gunfire, explosions, and aircraft engines filled the news, radar remained in the background, glowing softly in dark rooms, watched by young men who rarely received recognition. They were not on the front lines, yet their decisions affected every soldier and sailor in the field. Japan had nothing like this on the same scale. And that is where their story begins to turn. Japan's misunderstanding of radar created a weakness in their strategy, a weakness that grew with every month. They were not blind because of poor skill or lack of intelligence. They were blind because they believed the world was still operating by older rules. But technology had changed the world. And radar was the silent proof. As we move into the deeper emotional side of this story, we will explore the human experiences behind these signals. The fears, the mistakes, the courage, and the quiet tragedies on both sides. Because behind every dot on a radar screen, there was a human life moving closer to danger. Imagine yourself standing inside one of those early radar rooms. The lights are low. The smell of warm wires fills the air. A soft buzzing sound comes from the machines, steady and calm, almost like breathing. You hear the faint hum of electricity running through metal. The room feels small, but the responsibility inside it is enormous. A single line sweeps across the radar screen again and again like a heartbeat. The green glow lights the faces of the young operators watching it. Their eyes move slowly, carefully, never leaving the screen. They know that any shape appearing on that circular surface could change everything. Now imagine the sea far beyond them. Japanese aircraft glide across the sky, their engines vibrating through thin metal frames. The pilots sit upright, focused, trusting their training, trusting the darkness around them. They feel the cold wind push against their wings. They hear only the steady drone of their engines. The world below is covered in clouds, quiet and peaceful. They believe no one knows they are here. They believe their mission is still a secret. They believe the enemy is asleep. But someone is awake. Someone is watching. This moment captures the difference between the two sides. One side moves with confidence, certain they are unseen. The other side sits quietly in a room far away, listening to signals, waiting for patterns, trusting a machine more than their own eyes. There is a strange beauty in this contrast. Human skill on one end, human curiosity on the other. And between them, invisible radio waves connecting two worlds that cannot see each other. Sometimes history is like this. Two sides living in different realities until one day those realities collide. As Japanese forces continued to operate across the Pacific, they carried a deep belief in their own methods. Their culture valued discipline and precision. Their military training demanded silence, secrecy, and perfect execution. They flew in formation so tight it looked like a single creature moving through the sky. They studied routes, calculated distances, and practiced until their actions felt like part of their bodies. But the Americans were studying something too. They were learning how to read those formations on a screen. They noticed how a large group of aircraft created stronger reflections. They learned to tell the difference between a fast-moving fighter and a slow-moving bomber based on the shape of the signal. They learned how weather changed radar patterns. They discovered that even faraway aircraft left fingerprints on the screen. Every mission the Japanese flew, every maneuver they made, created a signal that someone in a dark room could see. And slowly, the Americans began to understand the rhythm of Japanese movement. To help you feel the true weight of this, imagine a quiet morning on a small Pacific island. The sun has not risen yet. The air is cool and heavy with moisture. Palm trees stand still, their leaves unmoving. In the distance, waves strike the shore with a soft, repeating sound. Inside a radar hut, a young soldier wipes his eyes, tired from a long shift. He is only 19, maybe 20. He misses home. He wonders how much danger will come today. Then suddenly a shape appears on the screen. His heartbeat quickens. He knows what that means. He calls for his partner. They watch the shape move. It is not a bird. It is not a storm. It is something big. Something approaching. Far across the sea, Japanese pilots continue their flight. They feel strong. Prepared. Protected by distance. They do not know that every minute they move forward, someone else is watching their progress with growing concern. This invisible connection between watchers and movers becomes the emotional center of this story. These radar operators were not traditional warriors. They did not hold rifles. They did not stand on the front lines. They were not celebrated in newspapers. Yet so many lives depended on their ability to understand a small glowing screen. They carried a weight that was quiet but real. They had to be calm. They had to act fast. They had to trust their instincts. And when they gave a warning, they had to hope someone above them would listen. Many times someone did not. This is one of the sad truths of early radar history. Technology advanced faster than belief. Younger soldiers trusted radar. Older officers doubted it. They believed in binoculars, in scouting airplanes, in traditional methods they had used for decades. And because of this, countless warnings were ignored. Countless chances to prevent disaster were lost. Radar had the power to save, but only if decisions were made in time. This gap between knowledge and action reveals something deeper about war. Machines can show us the truth, but humans must choose to accept it. In the Pacific, that choice was not always made. As the conflict grew, the difference in understanding between Japan and America widened. Japan continued to rely on older ideas of stealth, convinced their movements could not be tracked. They believed their pilots were skilled enough, their strategies complex enough, and their timing precise enough to remain hidden. But the ocean no longer belonged to shadows. It belonged to signals. Every Japanese movement, a fleet leaving port, a group of bombers rising from a runway, a formation crossing the sea, created a pattern that radar could see. They were not ghosts. They were bright shapes on a screen. Think of the frustration that must have grown on the Japanese side. Missions that should have been surprises were intercepted earlier than expected. Attacks that once worked perfectly were now slowed or stopped. American fighters appeared in the sky sooner than they logically should have. Ships changed direction as if they sensed danger before it arrived. Something was wrong. Something invisible. Something Japan did not understand. Finally, Japanese intelligence officers began asking questions. How was America predicting their moves? How were they responding so quickly? Was there a spy? Was someone leaking information? They looked in every direction except the one that mattered, the sky filled with invisible waves bouncing off their aircraft. They underestimated not just a machine but a new way of seeing the world. As radar grew stronger, American strategy changed. No longer did they need to search blindly for the enemy. They could plan. They could prepare. They could outmaneuver. Radar became one of the most powerful tools in modern warfare, not because it attacked the enemy but because it revealed the enemy. Battles are not won only with weapons. They are won with knowledge. Picture an American commander standing on the deck of a ship. The wind blows across his face. The ocean stretches endlessly around him. His crew waits for orders. Then an officer from the radar room arrives with a message. A large formation of aircraft is approaching. The commander takes a breath. Yes, time. He can respond. Radar has given him a moment that earlier generations never had. A chance to prepare before danger arrives. That moment, that single breath of readiness, is sometimes the difference between life and death. On the Japanese side, commanders did not receive such warnings. Their fleets could not see the enemy early enough. Their ships sailed into traps without knowing. Their pilots encountered American fighters sooner than they expected. Their submarines surfaced into danger they thought was far away. It was not lack of courage. It was lack of information. In war, information is as powerful as fire. As months passed, Japan slowly began to realize that something was happening, something they had not prepared for. Their commanders noticed unusual patterns in American reactions. They questioned why certain missions faced stronger defenses. They wondered how often America seemed ready, even during surprise attacks. But by the time they understood that radar was one of the keys, it was too late. America had built a network of radar stations across the Pacific. A network of eyes that never slept. A network of signals that connected islands, ships, and bases into one long chain of awareness. Japan could not escape this chain. Every time they moved, they were seen. And for the first time in their military history, Japanese forces had to face the possibility that the ocean no longer protected them. This realization marked a turning point in the war, a moment where strategy, pride, and technology collided. The old ways of thinking were no longer enough. The world had changed. The battlefield had changed. And Japan found itself fighting not just America, but a new form of warfare built on science, not secrecy. This is the emotional heart of the story. The Japanese forces were brave, dedicated. But they were moving through a world that had grown more visible than they believed. They were fighting with the strength of the past, while America was fighting with the vision of the future. And the future always sees farther. Now we step closer to the human side, the people inside this vast historical moment, whose lives were shaped by the silent battle of signals and shadows. The human story behind all of this begins in places that feel far away from the roar of battle. It begins in quiet rooms, dimly lit. It begins in families waiting at home. It begins in moments where fear, hope, and duty live inside the same heartbeat. War is made of nations and decisions, but inside those decisions are people. Young, uncertain, brave people who must carry out actions they cannot always control or fully understand. Inside a radar station, the life of an operator was simple on the outside but heavy on the inside. These were often young men not much older than school students, taken from ordinary lives and placed in front of a glowing screen that could decide the fate of thousands. They spent hours listening to static, watching for shapes that appeared and disappeared, trying to understand patterns that even experienced officers found confusing. Their chairs were stiff. Their uniforms clung to their skin on hot days. Their heads hurt from long shifts. But they stayed awake. They stayed alert. Because somewhere over the ocean someone might be coming. Imagine the pressure of that. Imagine the responsibility. A single missed signal could mean an attack without warning. A single mistake could mean lives lost. And yet, many of these operators worked through exhaustion, hunger, and fear, not because they were ordered to, but because they knew how important their job was. One operator once described the feeling as listening to the sky breathe. That is what radar was to them, a way of hearing the world. Every echo carried meaning. Every blip told a story. And every moment they watched the screen, they felt the invisible connection between themselves and the unknown. Now imagine a Japanese pilot preparing for a long mission. He sits in the small cockpit of his aircraft, the metal trembling gently around him. His hands grip the controls. Sweat forms across his forehead. Even though the air is cold outside, the engine beneath him gives off heat that fills the space. He looks at the photo tucked inside his flight suit, maybe of his parents, his wife, or his child. He whispers a quiet prayer or promise. He does not see radar. He does not understand radars. He does not know that miles away someone is already watching him move through the darkness. To him the sky is still a friend. The night is still a shield. His mission is clear. His belief is strong. He thinks he can arrive unseen. The tragedy is not that he is wrong. The tragedy is that he never had a chance to be right. This human misunderstanding, this invisible wall between what the Japanese believed and what the Americans had learned, made the war more painful, more complicated, more emotional. People on both sides were doing what they thought was best. People on both sides acted with honor, courage, and fear. But the world had shifted under their feet, and not everyone realized it soon enough. Let us return to a radar station for a moment. A young operator sees a signal forming on the screen. His breath catches in his throat. His heart speeds up. He calls to his superior in a voice that is calm on the outside but trembling on the inside. His superior walks over, looks at the screen, and becomes quiet. They can both feel it now, the sense that something is coming. Something large. Something dangerous. Outside the room, the world is calm. Birds sit on branches. Leaves rustle in the wind. Waves kiss the shoreline with soft foamy edges. But inside the station, time begins to stretch and tighten. Every second feels important. Every movement matters. The operator writes down the readings. He traces the path. He watches the blips move in a line. These blips are not just dots. They are aircraft. They are human lives. They are the beginning of something no one can stop. When he reports the findings, he hopes someone will understand. He hopes someone will react. He hopes his warning will become action. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it does not. And in that difference lies the quiet emotional strain that radar operators carried with them long after the war was over. Some remembered the blips they detected before battles. Some remembered the blips they detected before tragedies. Some wondered if they could have done more. On the Japanese side, pilots sometimes wondered how the Americans reacted so quickly. They would return from missions feeling confused. Their commanders would ask questions. Reports were written. Some pilots believed the Americans simply got lucky. Others suspected a spy. Few imagined the truth, that a young operator had watched them from thousands of miles away, reading their movements in the glow of a radar screen. War is often remembered through explosions, but it is made of quiet moments like these, small decisions, unnoticed signals, and human emotions rising and falling inside the men who lived them. On American ships, radar brought comfort. It gave sailors a sense of safety in the open sea. When the sky was dark and nothing could be seen, radar provided a kind of invisible lighthouse. Sailors slept easier knowing someone was awake in the radar room watching over them. Some nights, the operators would detect a faint signal far away, and that information would ripple through the ship like a silent alarm. Sailors would rise from their bunks. Officers would gather. Pilots would be briefed. Radar gave time to prepare, time to fight, time to survive. Japanese sailors did not have this luxury. Many relied on lookouts standing on deck, eyes straining in the wind, searching for shapes in the distance. These lookouts were trained and skilled, but they were still human. Rain could blind them. Fog could hide enemy ships. Darkness could swallow everything. If danger approached from the wrong direction, they would never see it until it was too late. Imagine standing on the deck of a Japanese destroyer at night. The waves crash against the hull. The sky above you is full of stars. The wind tastes of salt. You feel the cold metal railing under your hands. You are assigned to watch the horizon for any sign of an enemy. But the sea is huge. The night is deep. Your eyes can only see so far. You trust your instincts. You trust your training. But you do not know that somewhere beyond the horizon, a ship with radar already knows where you are. This imbalance slowly shaped the emotional world of both navies. American commanders became more confident, more prepared. Japanese commanders became more cautious, more uncertain. And every time a mission failed because the Americans seemed ready, frustration grew within the Japanese ranks. Confidence began to crack. Questions began to rise. Why were the Americans always prepared? How did they know? What had changed? It took time for Japan to discover the truth. And when they finally realized the power of radar, the war had already turned against them. They tried to develop their own systems. They tried to catch up. But technology requires time, practice, and understanding. and time was no longer on their side. There is another layer to this story, the emotional weight on American radar operators when they detected Japanese aircraft. They knew that the signals they saw represented human beings, not machines. They did not see enemies. They saw motion. They saw life moving toward danger or toward a mission they believed in. Some operators later admitted that they felt conflicted. They knew their job was to protect, but they also knew that each blip on the screen was a person with hopes, fears, and families. War forces people to carry heavy truths. On the Japanese side, pilots carried their own emotional burdens. They were raised with deep cultural values, loyalty, sacrifice, honor. Many believed they were protecting their homeland. Many believed they were doing what was necessary. Some were afraid but hid it. Some wrote letters home hoping their families would be proud. Some knew the risks and accepted them with courage. But none of them expected that their movements could be seen by an invisible machine in the sky. This misunderstanding created one of the most human tragedies of the war. Brave men flying into missions they believed were secret, only to discover too late that the world had changed. As we move deeper into this story, we begin to understand something important. War is not only a battle of weapons. It is a battle of knowledge, of timing, of unseen forces that shape the world behind the scenes. Radar was one of those forces, and it forever changed how nations understood each other. This invisible technology became the silent guide of the war, a guide that shaped missions, changed strategies, and connected lives across oceans. The emotional weight of this story grows deeper when we look at how ordinary people lived through moments shaped by signals they never saw. War is often remembered through the loud and violent moments, but the quiet ones, the moments of waiting, hoping, guessing, and wondering, are just as powerful. These quiet moments live inside the hearts of the men who served, the families who waited at home, and the people who watched the world change without fully understanding why. Inside American radar stations, operators sometimes felt like they were holding a secret no one else could see. They watched shapes moving silently across the screen, knowing the men behind those shapes did not realize they were being detected. There was a strange sadness in this. Radar operators did not hate the people they were tracking. They were simply doing a job their country needed them to do. But in their quiet thoughts, they sometimes wondered what the Japanese pilots felt as they flew, unaware of the invisible eyes following them. Some radar operators later said they felt like they were watching two worlds collide, a world where Japan believed the sky was empty, and a world where America had learned to listen to signals traveling through darkness. The operators sat at the connection point between these two worlds, and that understanding stayed with them for the rest of their lives. They became witnesses to a truth that even many commanders did not realize. They saw the future before others believed in it. On the other side of the ocean, Japanese pilots carried their own emotional stories, each one different, each one shaped by culture, duty, and personal dreams. Some pilots wrote letters home the night before their missions. Some promised they would return soon. Some prayed. Some stared at the stars and felt proud to serve their country. Others felt fear but did not speak it aloud. They trusted their training. They trusted their commanders. They trusted the plan. And they trusted the darkness. They believed the sky protected them just as it had protected generations of fighters before them. They believed that if they flew carefully and silently, no one would detect them. They believed that surprise was their strongest advantage. They did not know that far away, in a small room filled with the soft glow of radar screens, their presence was already known. This creates a quiet emotional conflict, not between nations but between belief and reality. The Japanese pilots believed in the world they saw with their own eyes. The American radar operators believed in the world shown to them by invisible waves. Two truths existed at the same time, and only one of them matched the changing world. As Japanese forces continued their missions, small clues began to appear. American aircraft arrived earlier than expected. Defensive positions were already prepared before the attack. Ships moved in ways that suggested they had prior warning. Japanese commanders felt a sense of confusion that they did not speak of openly. Something was happening. Something that did not make sense. Some younger Japanese officers whispered theories. Maybe the Americans were lucky. Maybe they had improved scouts. Maybe they had discovered new patrol routes. But no one guessed the real reason. that American radar operators were watching every movement, building an invisible picture of the mission before it even reached them. One officer later described the feeling as fighting against a wall we could not see. That wall was not a physical barrier. It was the power of early detection, the power of preparation, the power of a technology Japan had dismissed too quickly. On American bases, pilots also lived with emotional tension. They often scrambled to their aircraft because of radar warnings. They ran across the runway with their hearts pounding, engines roaring as they lifted into the air. They trusted the radar operators completely. If the radar said something was coming, they reacted. Sometimes they flew into clear skies, unsure whether the signal was real. Other times they reached the exact point where enemy aircraft were approaching, proving the radar's accuracy. These American pilots felt a deep connection to the operators they had never met, strangers in small dark rooms whose warnings often saved their lives. On ships, sailors gathered on decks as radar officers shouted distances and directions. They tilted their heads toward the sky, searching for the enemy. Their stomachs tightened with nerves. Their hands shook slightly as they held their weapons. But they also felt steadier, knowing they had time to prepare. Radar gave them a gift that few wars had ever given before: knowledge of what was coming. In contrast, Japanese sailors often faced sudden danger. When American aircraft appeared, it felt like lightning from a clear sky. Some sailors blamed luck. Others blamed weather. Few understood that radar had erased the element of surprise. This difference in experience slowly shaped the emotions of the two sides. American forces felt increasingly aware and supported, even in moments of fear. Japanese forces felt increasingly uncertain, even in moments of strength. War is not only fought with weapons. It is fought with confidence. It is fought with understanding. It is fought with the mind. And radar gave the Americans a kind of mental strength that Japan did not have. Imagine a Japanese pilot, months into the war, flying through the night. The stars above him are bright. The moonlight lights the wings of his aircraft. His formation moves smoothly as they always do. But something feels off. Something feels different. He cannot explain it, but he feels watched. He feels exposed. He feels as if the sky, once trusted, has begun to reveal him. He does not know why he feels this way. Maybe it is instinct. Maybe it is fear. Maybe it is his mind trying to understand a world that is changing faster than he can follow. But that feeling, that strange sense of being seen, becomes more common as Japan faces defeat after defeat caused by unexpectedly strong American preparation. For the radar operators, the emotional experience is also complex. When they see a large enemy force approaching, they feel both fear and determination. They know their warning will send others into danger. They know their information might save lives, but it might also start battles where people will be hurt. They are not on the front lines, but they carry a quiet emotional burden, the knowledge that their signal begins a chain of events far beyond their control. Some operators remembered the sound of alarms ringing after they reported a threat. The sound echoed in their minds long after the war ended. Some could still see the green glow of the radar screen when they closed their eyes. Some remembered the calm moments when nothing happened. Others remembered the tense moments when everything changed. The emotional connection between technology and human experience becomes clearer the more we explore these stories. Radar was not just a machine. It was a window into the future. It changed how people understood danger, safety, distance, and time. It connected lives across oceans. It shifted the balance of power. It changed the rhythm of war. As Japan slowly realized the effect of radar, leaders tried to adjust. They attempted new formations. They attempted surprise routes. They attempted radio silence. But nothing could truly hide them from radar. The technology had grown too advanced. The network too wide. The operators too well trained. This realization broke something inside the Japanese command. They saw their strategies lose strength. They saw their tactics lose meaning. They saw their confidence weaken. The war began to feel less like a noble struggle and more like a race they were running with heavy weights tied to their feet. And still the radar screens glowed. Still the operators watched. Still Japan moved forward, unaware of the full picture the Americans had. This is where the emotional truth of the story reaches its deepest level. A moment when human belief, human error, and human courage come together in a single understanding. The world had entered a new age where battles were not only fought in open waters or on land, but also inside invisible waves crossing the sky. And the people who lived through it were caught between the old world they trusted and the new world that was being built without their permission. The war was changing. The sky was changing. And nothing would ever be the same again. As the war moved into its later stages, both sides began to feel the weight of exhaustion. Battles had been fought across islands, skies, and oceans. Thousands of lives had been affected. Families waited for news that might never come. Soldiers carried memories that would never fade. Technology, once a distant experiment, had now become a central part of survival. Radar was no longer a new idea. It was now a steady presence, a silent guardian for some, and an invisible threat for others. American radar operators, though hidden behind screens, played a powerful role in shaping the direction of the conflict. They tracked aircraft at night, in storms, and across miles of ocean where no human eye could see. They warned commanders of incoming danger. They gave fighter pilots time to prepare. They helped protect ships that might have otherwise been caught by surprise. Many operators did not fully understand the importance of what they were doing. They simply did their jobs, hour after hour, shift after shift, not realizing that their quiet work was helping their country move closer to victory. On the other hand, Japanese forces kept relying on older methods. Their navigators looked at the stars. Their lookouts scanned the horizon. Their commanders believed in silence, speed, and discipline. They fought bravely, but they were fighting a war where bravery alone was no longer enough. The world had changed. The technology had changed. And even though their hearts were strong, their tools could not match what America had built. One of the most emotional parts of this story is the moment when Japanese commanders finally understood what radar meant. Reports came in from the front lines. Pilots described being intercepted earlier than expected. Ships reported unexpected American reactions. Intelligence officers began to suspect that the enemy was seeing more than they should. Then came hard proof. Captured equipment. Intercepted radio messages. Observations from the battlefield. Slowly, a picture began to form, a picture of a technology Japan had underestimated. It must have been a painful realization. Everything they had trained for, everything they believed about surprise, everything they planned depended on one idea, that the enemy could not see them. Learning that their movements had been visible the entire time must have felt like discovering that the foundation beneath their feet had cracked. Some Japanese officers felt anger. Others felt confusion. Some felt a deep sadness. They had been fighting with honor, skill, and dedication, but against a force that had an advantage they never expected. Radar didn't just reveal their locations. It revealed the truth that the world they knew had already faded into history. Imagine a Japanese commander sitting in a briefing room, reading a report about American radar. His hand rests on the table. His eyes move slowly over the words. He understands the meaning. The surprise that once gave Japan its strength no longer exists. The night no longer hides them. The sea no longer protects them. The silence they trusted no longer covers them. A new kind of warfare has arrived, and he must now face that reality. Now imagine an American radar operator on a small island, ending his shift as the sun rises. He steps outside the dark radar room into warm morning light. The sky above him glows orange. Birds begin to sing. Palm trees sway softly in the breeze. He feels relief after a long night. He breathes deeply. But he also feels something harder to describe, a quiet understanding that he has seen things others have not. He has watched enemy aircraft that the pilots themselves believed were invisible. He has tracked movements that the enemy never expected anyone to follow. He has held knowledge that shaped battles far away from where he stood. Two men on opposite sides of the world. Two lives shaped by the same invisible force. Two people who will never meet, yet connected by radar signals crossing the sky. This is the true emotional depth of the story. War is not simply about victories and losses. It is about people realizing that the world they knew is changing. It is about learning that courage must share the stage with knowledge. It is about discovering that unseen forces, ideas, inventions, mistakes, assumptions, can shape destiny just as much as weapons do. As radar technology advanced, American confidence grew stronger. Ships sailed with more awareness. Aircraft approached battles with better preparation. Bases reacted faster. Commanders made decisions based on information that no human eye could have provided. The war began to tilt more clearly in America's favor. Not because of strength alone, but because of vision, a new kind of vision that reached across the sky. Meanwhile, Japanese forces struggled. Their aircraft were shot down more often. Their ships were intercepted earlier. Their missions, once smooth and successful, faced complications at every turn. They tried to change tactics, but America adapted faster. They tried to move quietly, but radar saw them. They tried to surprise, but the element of surprise belonged to the past. War is not only a test of strength. It is a test of understanding. And radar allowed America to understand what Japan tried so hard to hide. Some Japanese pilots realized too late that something was wrong. They felt it in their missions. They felt it in the speed of American reactions. They felt it in the skies that once welcomed them but now seemed sharper, watched, and heavy with risk. Some survived these missions. Some did not. The ones who survived carried a sense of confusion, mixed with respect for the enemy that had quietly outmaneuvered them. On the ground, Japanese families waited for news that came less and less often. Wives, mothers, and children prayed for the return of sons and fathers. They had no way of knowing that battles were being shaped by invisible signals far away. They did not know that the skies had become places of unspoken power. They did not know that the war had entered a new age they could not see. Back in America, families also waited. Mothers sat near radios. Fathers read newspapers. Children asked questions adults could not answer. They hoped their loved ones were safe. They trusted the officers and the new machines that promised to protect them. But they also knew that war offered no guarantees. Many prayed for peace. Many prayed for strength. Many prayed for the moment the world would go silent again. Radar kept working through all of this. It did not care about feelings. It did not know fear. It did not grow tired. It simply sent waves into the sky, collected their echoes, and revealed the truth. But the humans who watched those echoes, they felt everything. They felt the weight of warnings. They felt the tension of responsibility. They felt the fear of what might come next. And they felt the quiet pride of knowing that their work was saving lives. Eventually, Japan's leaders understood the full meaning of radar. They saw that this technology had followed their every move. They saw that every plan they made had been watched. They saw that their trust in secrecy had been misplaced. But by the time they reached this understanding, the war had reached its final chapters. Japan's struggle, courage, and dedication remained strong. But no amount of skill could overcome the advantage radar gave the United States. War ends not only when weapons are exhausted, but when one side realizes the future belongs to a different way of seeing. Japan came face to face with that realization. And now, with both nations nearing the final turning points, the meaning of this invisible war begins to rise into full view, a meaning that will soon touch not just the past but the world we live in today. As we look deeper into this story, something becomes clear. The war in the Pacific was shaped not only by ships, planes, and soldiers, but also by ideas. Ideas that lived inside metal towers, glowing screens, and moving waves of energy. Ideas that crossed the ocean faster than any aircraft. Ideas that traveled through time, changing the world long after the war ended. Radar was one of those ideas. It changed not only how battles were fought, but how nations understood danger, distance, and knowledge. Before radar, people believed that what they could not see could not harm them. Darkness was safety. Distance was protection. Silence was a shield. But radar changed all of that. It broke the boundary between visible and invisible. It turned the sky into a place that could be read like a book. It transformed the ocean into a space where secrets did not last long. Japan never expected this. And in many ways, it is understandable. No nation had ever fought a war shaped by invisible waves before. No one knew how powerful a quiet signal could be. No one imagined that a green blip on a screen could change the lives of thousands. Japan fought with courage and discipline. They fought with belief in their traditions. But belief does not stop a wave of the future. The world had stepped into a new age and radar was the doorway. This realization leads us into something deeper: the human truth behind every war. Technology does not fight wars alone. It depends on people who understand it, trust it, and use it with wisdom. American radar operators, though young and inexperienced at first, became the bridge between fear and knowledge. They learned to trust what the screen showed them even when their superiors did not. They learned to rely on patterns instead of guesses. They learned that the sky could speak in silent signals, and that those signals could save lives. But their emotional journey was not simple. They lived with constant pressure, knowing that every signal they detected might lead to a battle. They carried guilt when warnings were ignored. They carried pride when their information saved ships or bases. And they carried memories of nights filled with tension. Nights when the silence felt heavy because they knew something was coming long before anyone else did. On the Japanese side, the emotional journey took a different shape. Pilots began to sense that the world was changing around them in ways they could not control. Missions that once felt certain now felt risky. Surprise attacks no longer worked as planned. Aircraft formations began to suffer losses before they even reached their targets. Commanders watched their strategies lose power. Sailors watched their ships face danger without warning. Families waited longer for letters that never arrived. Some Japanese officers later said that it felt like fighting an enemy who could see through the dark. That is exactly what radar had made possible. It was not magic. It was not luck. It was the result of years of scientific work, long hours of training, and the belief that new technology could change the future. This invisible force shaped the war in a way few people understood at the time. And like all powerful ideas, radar also created questions that reach beyond the battlefield. What happens when humans create tools that allow them to see more than they ever could before? Does knowledge make us safer, or does it create new kinds of conflict? Is the world better when nothing is truly hidden, or does that take away something human? These questions did not exist before radar. But after radar, they became part of every conversation about technology, security, and human responsibility. When the war finally reached its closing stages, both sides were exhausted. Japan had fought bravely but faced increasing losses. America had gained strength but carried the heavy cost of every life lost along the way. The Pacific, once wide and silent, had become one of the most watched places on Earth. Radar stations lined the islands. Ships carried powerful detection systems. Aircraft flew with early warning equipment. The war had changed and the world with it. By the end, Japan understood the truth about radar. They understood how deeply it had shaped the outcome of the war. They tried to develop their own improved systems, but the time left was too short and the resources too few. Radar had given America a kind of vision that Japan could not match. Yet this is not a story of one nation being smarter than another. It is a story of timing, a story of belief, a story of how technology grows quietly until one day it becomes the turning point of history. Japan believed in old methods because those methods had worked for decades. America believed in new methods because scientists pushed for innovation. This difference created a gap that widened as the war went on. Radar filled that gap. It shaped strategy. It protected ships. It guided pilots. It caught attacks early. It created a picture of the sky that Japan could not see. And because of that, the war's direction changed. Now step back for a moment and imagine the world after the fighting ended. Radar stations, once filled with operators staring at glowing screens, became quiet. Many were dismantled or turned into training centers. The machines stopped humming. The rooms grew cold. The green screens went dark. The war was over, but the technology that shaped it would continue into the future. Scientists began improving radar systems for civilian use. Airports used them to guide planes safely through storms. Weather forecasters used radar to track hurricanes and save lives. Ships used radar to avoid collisions. The same waves that once guided battles now guided peace. Japan too learned from this. In the years after the war, they became one of the world's leaders in advanced technology, radar included. They studied it, improved it, and eventually became masters of the very systems they once underestimated. This is one of the great ironies of history. Sometimes the lessons that hurt the most become the ones that push us forward the farthest. Looking at this story from above, we begin to see its deeper meaning. It is not only about radar. It is not only about Japan and America. It is about how humans react when the world changes faster than they expect. It is about how belief can become a weakness if it does not grow. It is about how silence can hide danger, but also hide possibility. It is about how the smallest discoveries, invisible waves moving through the sky, can shift the course of nations. Most of all, it is about how people adapt to a new world. Japanese pilots had courage. American radar operators had awareness. Japanese commanders had discipline. American commanders had information. Each side carried something strong. Each side carried something human. But the future belonged to the side that could see farther. And in the Pacific War, radar allowed America to see what Japan could not. This is not a lesson in victory or defeat. It is a lesson in understanding. A lesson in listening to the world even when it speaks in whispers instead of shouts. A lesson in how powerful it can be to pay attention to things we cannot see. Radar changed the way humans understood the sky. It changed the way nations understood each other. It changed the meaning of distance, silence, and time. And from that moment onward, the world would never again believe that the night could hide everything. As the years of war drew closer to their end, a deeper understanding began to rise, slowly at first, then all at once. People on both sides started asking the same quiet question: how much of this war had been shaped by things no one could see? The sound of distant engines, the glow of burning ships, the cries of soldiers, these were the moments people remembered. But behind those moments were invisible signals, moving silently across the sky, shaping decisions before anyone knew what was happening. Japan entered the war believing they understood the world. They believed the sky could not betray them. They believed the oceans protected them. They believed discipline, courage, and secrecy were enough to shape victory. These beliefs had guided them for generations. They came from culture, tradition, teaching, and experience. But belief is powerful only until the world shifts beneath it. And the world had shifted. Radar revealed a truth Japan was not prepared for. It showed that even the strongest traditions can be tested by new knowledge. It showed that the sky could speak in ways humans never imagined. It showed that power does not only come from strength, but from the ability to see farther and understand deeper. In many ways, the Pacific War was a turning point in human history because it forced nations to confront the limits of their own vision. The war taught everyone that the world was becoming more connected, more visible, and more dependent on technology. It taught leaders that ignoring new inventions could be dangerous. It taught soldiers that the battlefield was no longer only where they stood, but also in the signals moving around them. And perhaps most importantly, it taught humanity that the unseen is often more powerful than the seen. For the radar operators who served during the war, these lessons stayed with them for the rest of their lives. Many of them returned home, started families, and moved into ordinary jobs. But they carried silent memories of nights spent staring at glowing screens, watching shapes that represented danger approaching from across the ocean. They remembered the fear they felt when those shapes grew larger. They remembered the relief they felt when their warnings were understood. They remembered the sadness that came when warnings were ignored. Some radar operators described their role as being the first to know. This was not a feeling of pride. It was a feeling of burden. They knew something before anyone else. They saw the beginning of danger before it reached the ships and bases. They held knowledge that could save or end lives. And even though they were far from the explosions and gunfire, they felt connected to every life touched by the signals they saw. On the Japanese side, pilots who survived the war carried a different kind of memory. They remembered flights that once felt smooth and controlled. They remembered the silence of night missions. They remembered moments when they trusted the darkness, only to find American aircraft waiting for them. Many of them did not know why this happened. They did not understand how America predicted their routes. Some believed it was luck. Some believed it was strategy. But the truth was hidden behind a machine they never saw. Over time, many Japanese veterans came to understand radar's role. Some felt frustration. Some felt respect. Some felt that they had been fighting not just an enemy, but a new age of warfare they were not prepared for. And even though technology had defeated their secrecy, they carried themselves with dignity, knowing they had done everything they could with the knowledge they had. War does not decide who was good or bad. It only shows who was ready for the future and who was still trusting the past. As the war neared its final turning points, the impact of radar grew even clearer. American forces used it to track enemy fleets, guide their own planes through storms, and avoid hidden dangers. They used it to coordinate massive operations across islands scattered like stars in the ocean. They used it to protect convoys carrying food, medicine, and equipment. They used it to fight not with fear but with information. Radar had become more than a tool. It had become a language of waves and echoes, a language that told the truth before anyone else could speak it. With this language, America gained clarity. Without it, Japan faced confusion. The emotional weight of this contrast is seen most clearly in the final months of the conflict. American commanders made decisions with confidence because they had a picture of the battlefield that Japan did not. Japanese commanders made decisions with uncertainty because the sky no longer behaved the way they expected. This shift in understanding, from confidence to doubt, changed everything. Try to imagine the emotional world of a Japanese naval officer standing on the deck of his ship during those final months. He looks at the sea around him, the same sea he trained on, the same sea he trusted. But something feels different. He cannot shake the feeling that he is being watched. He cannot explain why American aircraft arrive so quickly. He cannot understand how the enemy always seems to know where he is. He speaks to his crew with strength, but inside he carries questions that no one taught him to answer. Then imagine an American radar operator sitting quietly miles away watching small blips appear and disappear. He marks the positions on his chart. He speaks calmly to his team. He does not know the names of the men behind the blips. He does not know their faces, their dreams, or their fears. But he knows where they are. And he knows his information will shape the decisions of others. Two men. Two sides. Two different realities shaped by the same invisible waves. Stories like these reveal something important about human life. We are all shaped by forces we do not see. Ideas, discoveries, mistakes, and beliefs guide our paths long before we understand them. War makes these forces feel sharper, heavier, more immediate. But even in peace, the same truth remains. The unseen world shapes the seen world. Radar was the physical proof of that truth. By the time Japan fully understood this new reality, the war had already turned toward its end. Radar could not be undone. The advantage it gave America could not be reversed. Japan fought bravely, but bravery alone could not overcome a shift this large. And so, the end of the war approached with a quiet sense of inevitability, a feeling that something had changed forever, not just for Japan or America but for the entire world. Because radar did more than influence battles. It changed how humans understood themselves. It changed how nations plan their futures. It changed the relationship between knowledge and power. It changed the meaning of safety, surprise, and preparation. It showed that the greatest dangers are often unseen, and so are the greatest protections. And when the war finally stopped, the silence that followed was filled not only with sorrow, but with reflection. People across the world began to ask what this invisible technology meant for the future. Would it make wars safer or more dangerous? Would it protect nations or threaten them? Would it bring peace or tension? No one knew for certain. But everyone agreed on one thing. The world had entered a new era. Radar was not the only technology shaping this new era, but it was one of the first to reveal that information, true, accurate, timely information, had become as powerful as any weapon. Japan never expected American radar to read their every move. But it did. And in doing so, it reshaped the path of history. When the echoes of the Pacific War faded, the world stood still for the first time in years. Nations breathed in a silence they had forgotten. Soldiers returned home carrying memories of fear, courage, and confusion. Families that had waited by windows and radios finally embraced loved ones, or mourned those who would never return. Cities that once shook under the sound of aircraft engines began rebuilding their streets, their homes, their futures. And in the middle of all this, radar, a technology once known to only a few, became a symbol of how far human understanding could reach. It is impossible to count how many lives radar saved. Impossible to measure how many battles it shaped. Impossible to know how many decisions were changed because someone, somewhere, in a dark little room, saw a blip on a screen before anyone else knew what it meant. But what we do know is this: radar was one of the quiet forces that turned the tide of the war. It was an invention that whispered the truth in a time full of noise and uncertainty. Japan eventually learned this truth, but not in time to change the war's direction. Their strongest strategies, surprise, secrecy, speed, had been undone by a machine they thought was too new to matter. This misunderstanding became one of the great turning points of the conflict. Not because Japan lacked skill or bravery, but because they did not expect the world to change so suddenly. The emotional weight of that realization stayed with many Japanese veterans long after the war ended. Some spoke of feeling caught between two ages, the age they trained for and the age that arrived too quickly. They had learned to trust the night, but the night no longer protected them. They had learned to trust silence, but silence no longer hid them. They had learned to trust distance, but radar erased distance like chalk from a board. Yet even in this loss, something powerful emerged: understanding. As Japan rebuilt after the war, they became one of the world's leaders in science, electronics, and innovation. Radar, once a symbol of defeat, became a tool Japan would study, improve, and master. The nation that once underestimated the power of invisible waves eventually became one of the greatest creators of technologies that rely on those very waves. This transformation is one of the most inspiring chapters in Japan's modern history, a reminder that even painful lessons can lead to remarkable progress. On the American side, radar operators returned home quietly. They did not speak loudly about their role. Many felt others would not understand what it meant to read a screen that showed danger long before it arrived. They had no medals that shone brightly. No parades celebrating their work. They carried only memories of green glowing circles, long nights, and decisions that shaped battles far away. Some went on to become engineers. Others became teachers, mechanics, farmers, and fathers. But inside them remained a small spark: the knowledge that they had witnessed the rise of a new world before most people even noticed. The true story of radar is not just about war. It is about awareness. It is about how humans learn to see beyond their senses. It is about how the world grows when curiosity replaces fear. And it is about how nations must adapt to new realities, even when those realities arrive quietly. Radar showed the world something simple but powerful: that truth does not always reveal itself through light and sound. Sometimes it reveals itself through silence, through waves that cannot be seen, but must be understood. As years passed, radar moved from battlefields into everyday life. It guided airplanes safely across continents. It allowed ships to travel through fog without fear. It helped scientists track storms and warn people before hurricanes arrived. It became a vital part of weather forecasts, aviation, shipping, and even space exploration. What once shaped the war now shaped peace. Japan and America, once enemies, later worked together to improve these technologies, turning former rivalry into shared progress. The same nations that once clashed across the Pacific would later collaborate on research, communication, and trade. Radar, in its own quiet way, became part of the bridge between them. Looking back on this story now, we see something deeper than strategy or technology. We see a lesson that belongs not only to the past but to all of us today. A lesson about how easily we underestimate what we do not yet understand. A lesson about how dangerous it can be to trust only what we can see. And a lesson about how the world changes long before we notice. Japan never expected American radar to read their every move. They believed the sky was silent. They believed the sea protected them. They believed the enemy saw nothing. But radar saw everything. It saw beyond darkness. It saw beyond distance. It saw beyond silence. It saw the future long before anyone else could. This is why the story of radar is more than a military tale. It is a story about human adaptation. It is a story about how our inventions shape us, test us, and sometimes save us. It is a story about the invisible forces that guide our lives, whether we are aware of them or not. And it is a reminder that the most powerful changes in history often come quietly, softly, through discoveries the world does not notice until it is too late to ignore. In the end, radar did not win the war alone. But it changed how the war was fought. It changed how nations understood danger. It changed how humans connected with the unseen world around them. It shaped the destiny of thousands of lives, and the future of global peace and technology. The Pacific grew silent when the war ended, but the world it left behind was different. A world watched not only by human eyes, but by waves that travel through the air every second, helping us navigate, communicate, and survive. And the story that began with a quiet blip on a green screen became one of the most important chapters of the modern age. When we look back at the long and difficult years of the Pacific War, it is easy to focus on the battles, the commanders, the victories, and the losses. But sometimes the real story lives in the quiet details, hidden between the loud moments of history. Radar was one of those quiet details. It did not shout. It did not shine. It did not take center stage. Yet it shaped the path of the war in ways few people understood at the time. It began as an experiment created by scientists who believed that the world could be seen in a new way. It grew into a tool used by young operators who trusted a technology older officers doubted. And it became the silent force that revealed the movements of an enemy who believed they could not be seen. Japan never expected American radar to follow their every step. They never imagined that waves in the air, invisible to the human eye, could create a picture of their plans before those plans were even carried out. They never thought the night could turn against them, or that silence could suddenly become a weakness. They fought with courage, skill, and discipline, but they could not see the new world taking shape around them. America, on the other hand, stepped into that new world earlier. Their belief in science, their trust in innovation, and their willingness to explore the invisible gave them an advantage that changed everything. Radar did not just guide planes and ships. It guided decisions. It guided strategy. It guided the future. And yet, behind this powerful technology were human hearts. Young men sitting in dark rooms listening to echoes and watching for signals. Pilots who launched into the sky based on warnings they trusted. Sailors who stood on decks knowing someone somewhere was watching over them. War often tries to divide people into sides, but when we look deeply, we see that the emotions underneath are universal. Fear, courage, hope, confusion, responsibility, loss. These feelings are shared by everyone, no matter their uniform or nation. The radar operator in an American station, the pilot in a Japanese cockpit, the families waiting in villages and cities across both countries. All of them lived through the same uncertainty, the same longing for safety, the same wish for peace. When the war finally ended, radar did not disappear. It became part of everyday life. It guided aircraft through storms. It protected ships at sea. It helped predict weather and save communities from natural disasters. It became a symbol of how knowledge can protect instead of harm. And nations that once fought began working together, sharing ideas, building new technologies, and shaping a world where the unseen could help save lives instead of take them. This is the final truth of the story. Radar changed the war, but it also changed humanity. It taught us that the world is bigger than what we see. It taught us that the future belongs to those who pay attention to the quiet signals. It taught us that strength is not only in weapons but in understanding. And it taught us that even the smallest discovery, invisible to the eye, can guide the destiny of nations. As we close this chapter, imagine once more the radar screen in a dark room. The soft green glow. The slow-moving line. The quiet hum of electricity. A young operator watching, waiting, listening. Somewhere far away, planes move across the sky, their pilots unaware that their presence has already been noticed. In that single moment, the past and future meet. The old world and the new world touch. And history quietly turns in a different direction. Japan never expected American radar to read their every move. But the world changed the moment radar began to listen. Today, long after the war has ended, invisible signals still travel across the sky, guiding planes, watching storms, protecting oceans, connecting continents. They are reminders of how far we have come, and how important it is to understand what we cannot see. Because sometimes the most powerful forces in life are silent. Sometimes they exist beyond our senses. And sometimes, like radar in the Pacific War, they change everything. This is the story of the invisible waves that shaped a conflict, the people who trusted them, the people who were surprised by them, and the world that emerged in their wake. A world forever linked by signals moving quietly through the air, reminding us that even in darkness, there is always something watching, always something learning, always something guiding us toward the truth. The sky is no longer silent. And we, as a world, are no longer blind.